Good evening. Welcome to your APTN National News Weekend Edition. I'm Melissa Ridgen. We're going to start off in BC, where the conflict between some Wetsuweten, the RCMP, and Coastal GasLink pipeline has flared up all week. Wetsuweten said that RCMP are blocking food and supplies, while 500 pipeline workers are stranded behind the blockades in camps. RCMP have arrested several at the blockades. Later in the week, APTN's Lee Wilson sets the stage of what transpired before those arrests.
A Wetsuweten clan issued an evacuation order to Coastal GasLink to leave their territory. Then they put up blockades on the Maurice West Forest Service Road near Houston this Sunday. In a social media video, heavy equipment could be seen digging the road and moving a car onto the forestry road.
From all accounts, they had no intention of leaving. So at that point, the Maurice River FSR and Maurice West FSR were deactivated, and so they are now impassable.
In the video, CGL employees could also be seen delivering a BC Supreme Court injunction order which prohibits blockades in the area. Today, Coastal GasLink issued a statement. They are worried about 500 workers being stuck behind the blockades. Coastal GasLink remains very concerned for the safety of our over 500 workers who are currently stranded at our 2 lodges in the area, as illegal blockades on the Maurice River Public Forest Service Road continue to block all exits and access. In the last 24 hours, opponents have significantly damaged the Forest Service Road at Lamprey Creek Bridge. The company also released aerial photos of the blockades. Yesterday, Giddamden Access Point sent a tweet. RCMP have set up an injunction zone and are not allowing members and supplies through. RCMP are blocking food and medical supplies from Wetsuweten homes. The RCMP are openly violating the human rights of Wetsuweten people again. Giddamden Access Point has a land occupation site at 44 kilometers up the forestry road. Giddamden are one of 5 Wetsuweten clans. Further up the road at the 66-kilometer is the Unistoten camp, which has a healing village and cabins, which is associated with Dark House, one of 13 Wetsuweten house groups. APTN contacted RCMP for a statement on the RCMP roadblock. A spokesperson did not confirm the injunction was being enforced in the area. At this time, the RCMP continues to have a police presence in the area and are conducting roving patrols. We continue to monitor and assess the situation. Coastal GasLink is calling on the government for urgent action to solve the situation. Giddamden clan members say they will attempt to get supplies to members up the Forest Service Road. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
We are staying on top of that story throughout the weekend, and we'll have the latest for you on Monday. Well, still in BC, had one of the worst storms in recorded history last weekend with a month's worth of rain in just 48 hours, and the fallout continues still a week later. Here's APTN's Tina House.
From the Malahat Highway on Vancouver Island, with newly formed waterfalls, to the Othello Tunnel, where the water is so intense, there are fears this bridge might get washed away. Then there's the Coquihalla Highway, which is the main artery to connect Vancouver to the rest of Canada, that is completely washed away in some sections. And then there is Merritt.
City of Merritt, underwater.
The entire city has been evacuated with no word when they can return home.
We are seeing significant rain-induced incidents such as mudslides and flooding in the southwest and central regions of the province. People in Merritt, Princeton and areas along Highway 7 and 99 and the Coquihalla are seeing the worst of it.
Joan Shackley says she has never seen this type of flooding in all of her 74 years. Her First Nation of 7,000 members is just outside of Merritt, and it's now completely stranded because all the bridges have washed away.
I came back to check out the bridge, the main bridge that takes us onto the highway, and I was only there 20 minutes, and I've seen this side of the bridge collapse. The cell phones are not working, the hydro is still off, and nobody can use their cell phones because there's no Wi-Fi. We got no way out.
Hundreds of people have been trapped in their vehicles because of the mudslides, and some are finding refuge in the town of Hope, where there are reports of low amounts of food and fuel. They've also had no power for a few days. Mandy and her sister Carly were a few of those that were left stranded. They were in the midst of moving to Richmond from Saskatchewan when they encountered the storm just outside of Hope. They joined us by Facebook video.
It was pretty long. We thought it was only going to be a couple hours that we're going to be sitting in the car, and then I went to bed. Luckily, we had our blanket because it was cold. She had to shut off her car for like the entire night just so our battery wouldn't die while we were sitting in a long lineup. It was raining like the entire time.
And that experience turned into sleeping in this small car for 2 nights. Her sister says they were running low on food.
There's definitely points where I was worried about running out of food and gas, as I was low, like I had only a quarter left of gas left by the time we got there. And we had a lot of candy, but that I don't think that would have been...
That's not very filling.
Yeah, filling.
Both girls have found a safe place to stay for now, but the highway is still closed in both directions, and others have been rescued by helicopter. It's hard to say when the highways will be open again. On Highway 1 between Abbotsford and Chilliwack, that highway is completely underwater, and in some areas, that water is up to 5 feet high. There is a local state of emergency, and 1,100 people have been evacuated, and numerous farmlands in the Sumas Prairie is also underwater. With so many mudslides and flooding, the Lower Mainland is now completely cut off from the rest of Canada by road. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Nunavuts' 6th Legislative Assembly held their leadership forum to choose a new premier. He is a 37-year-old former president of a land claims organization. Kent Driscoll explains what went down at the Legislative Assembly.
Thanks. And Nunavuts' new premier is PJ Akioko, 2-term president of the QIA, the Regional Inuit Association for Baffin Island. He left that job to run for assembly, and now he's the premier. Under Nunavuts' consensus system, the members together pick the premier. Now, Akioko faced off against incumbent premier Joseph Ikita and former health minister Lauren Kusagak. Now, as QIA president, Akioko sat on the Nunavut Tungavik board. That's the territorial Inuit organization. Now, NTI have been at odds with the government of Nunavut for more than a year now. Lawsuits, the works. Here, Akioko is answering a question about how much influence NTI should have in the Legislative Assembly. He's speaking in Inuktitut, so the voice you're going to be hearing is that of the Legislative Assembly's interpreter.
If I get elected as Premier, this would be my priority to go directly to the president of NTI and explain that we want to have an open relationship with them. And on top of that, I will work hard about the regional Inuit associations in the Kivalliq, Qitilmut, and Qikiqtani regions. I would go to their communities and listen to them.
It sure sounds like NTI will have the ear of the new premier. The Inuit organization questions continued at the Assembly. Here's what the new premier had to say when asked about working with those Inuit organizations on the important issue of housing.
And also, it's not really Nunavut, Tungavik, it's NCC or SAKU or KC. Those are organizations. I think we have to be open to them on how we can work together better on lack of housing. We have to collaborate on that.
Here's why that answer is important. He's describing the business development arms of those Inuit organizations. Now, every Nunavut premier talks about wanting to have a closer relationship with Nunavut Tungavik, but it looks like this premier is proposing something very different. Back to you in Winnipeg.
Thanks for that, Kent. Well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, a Blackfoot family still has more questions than answers a year after their loved one died in police custody. Stay with us. The family of a Blackfoot man who died in Calgary police custody over a year ago still is looking for answers as Alberta's Serious Incident Response Team continues to investigate how he died. His mother seeks justice. APTN's Tamara Pimentel has that story.
A vigil for 41-year-old Sonny Crazy Bull was held at the C-Train station over a year ago now. This is where he was arrested on October 23, 2020. His family in shock after learning Sonny died in police custody. Today, the cause of death is still unknown. And for his mother, Shelley Crazy Bull, that shock hasn't gone away.
I would like answers. Now it's been over a year. My son, he was so a gentleman. He was loving, caring. He was a kind person. He didn't have to go through this.
Sonny told his mother he was meeting his niece at the train station and would walk her home to attend a church service together. That's when he was arrested following reports of a man in possession of an airsoft gun. He ended up being charged with breach-related offenses. According to a police report, it was stated that during a routine cell check, Sonny was eating his meal. By the next check, he was unresponsive in his cell. Hours later, Shelley was notified by police that her son had passed.
I couldn't believe it. It was very unbelievable. My son was just home. He was okay, and he's healthy. He's very healthy.
The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team is still investigating what happened to Sonny Crazy Bull, and results may not come for some time. In a phone call with APTN, an ASERT representative said the team is under-resourced and is still working on files from 2018.
It's taken too long. That night, when the police came, things haven't been the same for me.
2020 was a difficult year for Shelley. 9 months before Sonny's death, her daughter Carmen passed away. Photos of the two surround her home, reminding her of happier times as she waits for closure. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Well, and another somber anniversary last weekend. It was the 50th anniversary of the murder of Helen Betty Osborne in the Pas, Manitoba. Family members and anti-violence advocates gathered to honor her. Raina Kastorkoff is with the Family Resource Centre in the Pas.
Helen Betty Osborne was targeted because the young men that went out that night, there were 4 of them, the intent was to go and find an Indian girl to have sex with.
For decades, Indigenous people from Manitoba were sent to a handful of so-called Indian hospitals or sanatoriums in the province. In most cases, it was to treat tuberculosis. As our Daryl Stranger shows us, though, a new research guide is being set up to help family members locate missing loved ones that never came home.
The University of Winnipeg created the Manitoba Indigenous Tuberculosis History Project in 2019 as a social media campaign. The goal was to identify unnamed Indigenous TB patients in photos donated by the Manitoba Lung Association.
And in a lot of cases, there is a wish to skip to reconciliation ahead of truth. It's truth and reconciliation, not just truth. And so our project is part of that truth-telling.
While identifying patients is still a goal of the project, a new research guide is being developed to help Indigenous communities and families find those missing TB patients that never came home.
This is something that's critical to truth and reconciliation and really healing around missing people from communities.
A searchable database of historical photos and resources for researching Indigenous TB history will be part of the guide being led by Dr. Ann Lindsay.
What we're looking at is trying to find a number of ways that communities can tell their own stories about the history and record their own stories. So there's going to be an oral history project coming up. There's been other research in the past. And then this project as well to try and help people be able to find their own information about what's happened to family members.
Dr. Lindsay previously worked for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and has spent years helping families research connections to residential and Indian hospital schools. Simplifying the process of looking for a missed loved one is her goal.
What we want to put together is a website that not only just has sort of links and ideas of places to ask, but a process about, go here first, and this is the kind of information that you need to go to this next step, and also just present it in a way that is useful and understandable for the people who are going to want to use this kind of research knowledge.
An oral history project with former hospital staff is also in the works, along with a traveling exhibit. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Alberta government has announced funding for emergency shelters across that province, with temperatures quickly falling. Some say that money should have arrived sooner. APTN's Chris Stewart explains.
On Wednesday, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced $23 million in funding, $13 million for emergency homeless shelters, $6 million for COVID isolation facilities, $2 million for emergency women's shelters, and $1.5 million to create 200 beds at Commonwealth Stadium. 11 shelters across the province will benefit from the cash. The NDP Seniors and Housing Critic says the province should have provided the money sooner.
Jason Kenney waited till we had a foot of snow on the ground and temperatures plummeted before he did anything to help Albertans.
Well, I'm excited.
Judith Gale is with the Bear Clan Patrol. They see firsthand every day how severe the homeless problem is.
We need more housing. We need more family shelters. We need to help our brothers and sisters get out of this perpetual cycle.
The government also announced a task force. 16 members will collaborate and try to find a way to reduce and potentially eliminate homelessness. One of the members is Cheryl Whiskey Jack. She is the executive director of the Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society. She says the funding is welcome, but more is needed.
It sounds like a lot of money, but the problem we have is a wicked problem. We live in a province where it's very cold, 6-7 months out of the year, and so this is a very important job that we have to do ahead of us.
She says the group will work together to find solutions.
The task force is being tasked with providing direction and expertise to the development of the model and to develop that draft model with recommendations within 6 months. So we have a very short timeline to get our work done. At the end of it, we have to submit a final report to the minister with specific and actionable recommendations.
Recommendations that she says will work towards eliminating homelessness.
What we're going to be doing, I'm hoping, is creating a path to that. It has to happen in steps, and so the shelter work that's happening out there is an important step in that process. It's a way to engage people to that path to being housed.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
An Indigenous-led project to house homeless people recently went up in smoke, and an employee from the City of London, Ontario, is charged with arson. The site of a proposed Indigenous shelter was set ablaze, and the nonprofit organization running it says that the act cannot be separated from colonialism. APTN's Elena McDougall has more.
The very act itself is another act of displacement, and we've suffered from displacement since the boats arrived and since settlement has happened here.
Raymond Deliri is referring to a fire that destroyed this building. It happened on the morning of November 8th at a London city-owned golf course that's now closed. Plans had been to temporarily shelter 30 homeless people at the site over the winter. An agreement was being finalized between the city and Atlosa Family Healing Services.
Initially, when I first heard about the fire, it was very disheartening. We were very saddened to hear that news, and we had so much hope for this service offering to be located where it was located.
Atlosa was hopeful that a space outside of the city would be peaceful.
Many of the community members involved with that process spoke about the need to access land and the need to be able to have access to green spaces and natural settings where they feel naturally at home, like so many of us do.
Police charged Michael Peter Belanger with arson. He's an employee of the City of London and has since been suspended with pay. Belanger is listed as an owner of a nearby home that was recently up for sale at a price of $1.6 million, according to reporting by the CBC.
We take these allegations against our staff member very seriously. We hold all employees to a high level of accountability in their service to our community. As such, we will cooperate fully in the process with our London Police Service.
City Manager Lynn Livingstone echoed Mayor Holder's words and released a statement adding, "We have been shocked and deeply concerned by the fire at River Road. It is an act of violence that has put some of London's most vulnerable people at greater risk by compromising the temporary Indigenous-led winter shelter proposed for the site." At a press conference, Mayor Holder said he hopes to announce specifics about alternate sites in the days ahead. Deliri called the arson an act of privilege.
The displacement that has occurred over the past 500 years in this country obviously continues to occur. And not as it only by the state, but now individuals acting on their own accord to say, we don't want you here. And this is what we're going to do to show you that we don't want you here.
The accused is scheduled to appear in London court February 7th, 2022 in relation to the charge. Elena McDougall, APTN National News, London.
Well, it's time for another break, but still ahead. An Atlantic museum celebrates Mi'kmaq culture, thriving in the face of 300 years of colonialism. Welcome back. An exhibit in the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic in Halifax. They're celebrating the many ways the Mi'kmaq continue to be unique, even after 300 years of colonization in the region. Angel Moore reports.
The new exhibit is called Don Meg Delgeg Nuwaldiek. It translates into English, How Unique We Are. Displays show the strength of Mi'kmaq culture and treaty relationships.
We have panels on evolution of the culture. We have panels on recreation, economic activity, water protectors, rights and responsibility, as well as the truth about different environmental impacts and how those impact our lives.
The youth of Pictou Landing First Nation built and painted this boat to share their connection to the water. Historian and guest curator Selena Kemp is from the Millbrook First Nation. She hopes the project inspires cultural pride because it was lacking when she went to school.
There was almost no representation of Mi'kmaq culture, and often when there was representation, it very much placed us in the past. And so this exhibit provides viewers with the opportunity to learn about the Mi'kmaq, not only of the past, but the Mi'kmaq of today.
The exhibit begins with a projection highlighting the connection to the land and water, featuring objects and artifacts of the past that inspired the present, such as the hockey stick. This small canoe and doll were created in the 19th century to trade with early Europeans.
One of the things that the Mi'kmaq adapted post-colonization was the creation of commodity art. And this is very much for the purpose of selling souvenir art to the many visitors to this land.
The lobster spear is no longer used, but the tradition remains strong.
And that was the concept of how wonderfully unique the Mi'kmaq continue to be even after all of this time.
The exhibit reveals Mi'kmaq culture of the past and the future, and it will run until next year. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabukduk, also known as Halifax.
Well, that's a look back at the news that made headlines last week. Thanks for joining us for the Roundup. I'm Melissa Ridge, and I'll see you back here Monday with the latest in Indigenous news. Have a great weekend.